Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ilsa Connect, and I'm the Deputy Director of Public Policy for the National Center for Victims of Crime. I want to thank everybody for waiting while we got through a technical difficulty. Today's web seminar is Denver's Burglary DNA Project, Catching Criminals and Serving Victims. We have two wonderful and experienced speakers from the Denver's DA's office with us today. Before we get started, I want to just go through a few housekeeping issues for those of you who are not familiar with our WebEx system. So the sound from today's webinar will be streaming over your computer speakers. And if you are having any technical issues, please check your speakers and the volume on your computer. If you can't get audio through your speakers, you can also join the teleconference. Go to the top of your screen and select Communicate, and then Join Teleconference, and the system will give you the steps to get into that teleconference. If you have any other issues, you can call WebEx support at 866-229-3239. Everybody who called in today is muted. You will not be taking any verbal questions, so you'll need to use the question and answer tool that is in the WebEx system. Here's a little graphic to show you what it might look like for you. You may have to maximize the Q&A tool. It's on the right side of your screen. There are several panels you can see. It also might appear as a floating toolbar on your screen. So you can type your question into the small box and hit send. That will come to me and to our speakers, and they are only seen by us and not by other participants. We're going to do our best to answer all your questions today at the end of the presentation, but if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up with you by email, and you're certainly welcome to email us also as well. Also notice that the chat function is not enabled for participants in the webinar. So anything that you need to reach us about, just use that question and answer tool. But if you have any issues during the webinar, check that chat box. As I sent you a message earlier, we'll send you a message through the chat box if anything comes up on the technological side. You may have noticed when you signed on that there was a poll at the right side of your screen. And if you haven't taken the poll, we ask you to do so now. We're going to close it in a few minutes, but those poll questions are intended to help us measure the effectiveness of our trainings, and we'll also have a poll at the end of our webinar, so stay tuned for that. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the National Center for Victims of Crime before I turn the webinar over to our presenter. The National Center's mission is to forge a national commitment to help victims of crime rebuild their lives. And we do this by providing training and technical assistance to professionals who work with victims through several programs. One of our largest programs is the Stalking Resource Center, and we also have a youth initiative aimed at dealing with youth victims of crime. We also work with Congress to secure rights and protections for victims and also funding for victim services. Since about 2002, the National Center has been focusing on increasing understanding of forensic DNA and DNA technology among victim service providers and other professionals who interact with victims of crime. We want to thank our funders, the Office for Victims of Crime, who support our work through a Recovery Act grant. The goal of this grant has been to ensure that professionals who work with victims may provide accurate and informed guidance to victims whose cases involve DNA evidence. And this webinar is the 8th webinar in a series of webinars that have been geared towards victim service providers. And it is actually our last webinar on this project, but all of our previous webinars are archived on our website, and we have more webinars to come through a variety of projects that will still focus on forensic DNA. I want to mention that we have developed materials about forensic DNA for victims and professionals who work with victims. We have also conducted interviews with professionals in the field and survivors who have important stories to tell about the power of forensic DNA. And those are all posted on our website, our DNA Resource Center, and you can see the website here, www.ncvc.org/DNA. And you'll find all that information and more on that DNA Resource Center. And also my contact information is here as well if you want to email me with a question or any comments. Okay, and now we're going to close the poll and hear from today's speaker. We are thrilled to have District Attorney Mitch Morrissey and Steve Siegel, the Director of Special Programs Unit of the Denver District Attorney's Office, with us today. I'm going to give a little bio for both of our speakers. Excuse me. Mr. Morrissey is the District Attorney of Denver, Colorado, and is internationally recognized for his expertise in DNA technology and criminal prosecutions. He introduced the first DNA evidence used in a criminal trial in Denver and has worked extensively on the Denver Cold Case Project, where more than 4,200 unsolved sexual assaults and murders have been reviewed in the hopes of solving them with DNA. With the Denver Police Department, he also runs a program to use DNA to solve burglary cases and other property crimes. Mr. Morrissey is one of the lead proponents of using familial DNA database searches in the United States and directs the Denver DNA Human Identification Research Project, which is studying the use of familial DNA searches in criminal investigations in Denver and Colorado. Steve Siegel is the Director of the Special Programs Unit in the DA's office and is responsible for the creation and supervision of cutting-edge criminal justice programs. These programs include the Cold Case DNA Project, Victim Services Network, and Elder Abuse Response. Mr. Siegel is the past chair and current member of the Governor's Advisory Council on Victims of Crime. He was recently appointed by the Governor as a founding member of the Colorado Criminal Justice Commission. In April 2006, he was presented with the National Crime Victim Services Award by the Attorney General of the United States. So Denver has been a leader in showing us how using DNA in burglary cases can really pay off by making neighborhoods safer and bringing justice to victims in burglary cases. So I want to welcome Mitch and Steve, and really thankful that they have taken the time to present for us today, and I will now hand the controls over to you if you are ready.
We're ready.
Excellent.
Thank you for the welcome. I'm going to start out, and then Steve will jump in during the presentation. But just for the listeners, basically we have been using DNA to solve property crimes for some time. We were approached by the National Institute of Justice in 2006 to be part of a 5-site study across the United States about using DNA to solve property crimes. They gave us $500,000 and wanted us to keep a lot of statistics regarding what we were able to do and our successes. We actually kept a little more than what they asked, and a lot of those statistics are here in our presentation. But anybody that is thinking about using DNA to solve property crimes, I would suggest that you do that. We have had incredible success in not only catching habitual burglars, but also in reducing the crime rate in our city. So we're going to take you through this presentation, and it's kind of like a setup in a home where a burglary has taken place, and hopefully we'll get the information out that you want to hear today.
On duty, Mitch Morrissey, Denver District Attorney, and Steve Siegel, Director of Special Programs. Watch for the same evidence detectives, forensic scientists, and district attorneys use in the Denver DNA burglary program to solve and prosecute crimes.
So our goal when we started was to evaluate the effectiveness of using DNA in burglary cases, and then of course that led into other property crimes like car break-ins where we were finding blood, that type of thing. So how many burglaries could we prevent during this period? And it was roughly a 2-year study that the $500,000 we received was for. We've kept the program going, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. How much money would we save using DNA to solve property crimes? And then we wanted to research and develop the best practices and talk about the impact on victims of burglary. So we looked at 510 investigations in the project. Of those, we were able to file 222 cases with my office. So there were 600 profiles that were uploaded into CODIS, and that resulted in 309 hits.
Hi, Mitch. Mitch, I'm sorry. It's Ilsa. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but apparently we're not seeing the slides in the main window.
Okay.
I want to
Just
see.
a sec.
Sorry.
Not a
folks,
problem.
hang on, folks. We'll see what's happening here.
Ilsa?
Yes.
We are unable to see share your desktop option.
Okay.
I'm going to it now.
Oh, now I see it.
Now you can see it?
Yeah, now it's coming up.
Do we need to go back?
Yes. I think that would be good. I think we probably just missed one or two, right? Okay. I think everybody's seeing it now. I hope I'm seeing it.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It looks like it's working now.
Okay, so I talked about how evaluating the effectiveness, and this is the number. So we saw in our CODIS hits a 51% average hit rate, and obviously we had more profiles than we had investigations because we had multiple profiles in some cases. We also had multiple cases on individuals, so we had 309 CODIS hits, but some of these habitual burglars we caught on more than one hit. They were involved in more than one case. So we caught 95 habitual burglars, and when I talk about they were primarily property offenders. In our state, they're habitual burglars if they have 2 or more burglaries. Most of these guys had 3 or more, and we prosecuted them in the project. We to date have filed 98 John Doe cases, and we were using John Doe cases a lot because our statute of limitations on burglary is 3 years. So we wanted to make sure if we're going to go to the expense of using DNA on these cases, that we were filing John Does on those that we didn't get a database hit on. So those cases would remain active and we'd be able to then file them once we did get our database hit. And 36 of those cases during the period of time of the study were converted over when we did get a hit in CODIS. This just shows you some of the different pieces of evidence that we pick up during the course of going through the house, and this is a half-eaten lollipop. So I talked about the John Doe cases and the 3-year statute of limitations that we have on property crimes. Obviously on sex crimes and on homicides we have a much longer or no statute of limitations. So we looked at starting the project, and one thing that we realized was that we had a whole group of detectives in our police department who had never been notified of a CODIS hit. They were property detectives. They had never seen a report. They had never used DNA in any of their cases. So we had to do some pretty in-depth training with our patrol, with our detectives, and to make sure that we were getting those cases filed correctly and that the evidence was being collected. One of the problems that we had was the John Doe cases. We had many detectives who had never filed a John Doe case before, so they'd never had a situation where they didn't have an individual in custody on an arrest warrant where they would process the case with the person's name. So that took some training, and we had to develop very good communication between our police department, the crime lab, and my office. So here you have the suspect moving into the study and a cigarette butt found there, and the saliva on that, of course, is the source of the DNA.
This is Steve now. It's important to understand that it's almost as important that you study how you do your relationships in developing a project like this as it is the concept that you're trying to put in place. And so for us, we refer a great deal to our triangle of leadership, which includes the Denver District Attorney's Office, the Denver Police Department, and in this case it's the line officers as well as the burglary investigators, and of course the Denver Crime Lab. So these relationships are nurtured to a great deal through training, through discussions, through meetings, and a great deal of discussion about solving problems, making sure that the work and the protocols of how each entity works really is in line with what will help the others do their jobs at best. Mitch mentioned communication, and always when you're developing good communications, you're really developing an enhanced sense of respect for each other's work. In all of our collaborative efforts, we have these universal principles, and I think you can see how these would apply to this setting. One would be a shared vision, and in this case, we certainly had not only a shared vision in the criminal justice community, but also in the community at large. The impact of burglary on our community and in all your communities is something that is very frustrating. Our communications need to be regular and ongoing, that when you sit at the table and develop these protocols, the people who are there have direct representation. It's not done by proxy, or it's not done by people who don't have the decision-making authority to set in place policies that will enhance things. You have to have a structure. It's not y'all come and get to it when you can. You do have to apply the resources to it, and I think Mitch talked about a very important topic, and that is the idea that after the federal money was gone, the commitment in our community was to keep the resources sustainable. And to this day, that is still a commitment of our local government. And then finally, through that respect that we talked about earlier, is a sense of trust in the decision-making of each of our entities.
So we had key personnel in the project that we identified primarily for the National Institute of Justice. It was I had a deputy that was assigned to these cases. We had a study coordinator who could keep the statistics, the program analyst who worked specifically and only on property crimes, which was a very important change in our crime lab. Primarily, property crimes would drop to the back of the list, and homicides and sex assaults would take priority. What we were able to do is get one person for this project and have that analyst dedicated to doing this program and property crimes. Of course, we used the CODIS manager a lot with all the profiles that I've talked about that we uploaded, the training with officers and detectives, and we tried to use it in such that the officers realized what it was they were looking at, what they needed to look for, and that they could collect evidence in easy samples and not necessarily bother our crime scene investigators. If it was more complicated, obviously the crime lab, crime scene investigators were called out, and those are detectives. Then we have the detectives that did the follow-up investigations, took statements, those types of things, put the case together for our filing.
A new way of catching burglars in Denver has reached a milestone. The city's DNA Burglary project, which uses biological evidence to link thieves to their crimes, resulted in its first criminal charges today. 9 News reporter Carrie McClure is following the story. Carrie, this is the typical way police catch this kind of criminal.
Now, Adele, crime labs are typically used for unsolved crimes and rape cases, but now Denver is one of only 5 cities nationwide to be testing out this DNA project just for property crimes. And if it's successful, it could potentially solve hundreds of burglary cases.
Inside this lab, criminals are being caught.
Anything that we find biological evidence in, those are the kind of cases we're looking for in this project.
Denver DA Mitch Morrissey is part of that project. Combined with the Denver Police Department, the Denver DA's office has created the DNA Burglary Project, specifically designed to use DNA evidence to catch property thieves and link them to other crimes. In fact, since it began last year, they've nabbed their first suspect. Michael Davis is charged with second-degree burglary. Police say he broke into these 3 homes in the Denver area, and his DNA evidence connected him to all of them.
We're going to reduce the burglary rate
A lot of DNA evidence will come through here in the project's 18-month trial run. More than 7,000 homes in the Denver area alone are burglarized in a single year.
What we're trying to do is find 500 burglary cases that have DNA in them and try to use that to show that DNA is critical in solving property crimes.
And catching thieves. Michael Davis, police hope, being the first of many.
The DNA Burglary Project is funded by a grant from the National Institute of Justice. Once the project's 18-month trial run is over, it will then be determined whether the federal government should spend more money to use DNA evidence on property crimes. Adele.
All right. Carrie, thanks a lot. Police and prosecutors say the project couldn't have come around at a better time. Burglary rates in Denver were up 5% last year, and numbers suggest they will continue to rise.
One piece that I'd like to add that's not a part of the project, but it was a parallel project going on at the same time. The Denver Police Department Victim Assistance Unit added burglaries to their priority cases. And so there was a victim assistance component outreach to see what folks needed in the aftermath of these crimes.
The interesting thing is that this news lady said that burglaries had been going up 5% a year, and that was true at that time. They've been going down on average 11% a year since we started this program. They dropped 11 the first year, 11 the next year, 9 the next year, and they've continued to go down ever since we've been using DNA to catch these property offenders. Obviously, this is some of the sources that we have for DNA that we found in crime scenes. We didn't have any teeth, bones, or tissue. Primarily, what we were interested in, unlike some of the other sites, they used smudge marks. They were looking for more touch-type DNA. We were primarily concerned with habitual burglars that left blood and saliva in our crime scene. And although we have different examples, for instance, this individual who urinated on people's clothing, those were rare. Primarily what we were looking for was blood and saliva. So here's some of the statistics, and this slide shows that. You can see that saliva was by far the greatest sample that we had. Blood was second, and then the other took up a smaller portion of that pie chart. So in 2 years, we were able to reduce the burglary rate in Denver by 26%. And what we did then is a study of how much money did that save, and what was the bang for the buck that we got. You can see that when we had DNA, we were 8 times more likely to be able to bring the charges than we were if we didn't have DNA. It's important to realize that all of these cases, for the most part, would have gone unsolved if it wasn't for using DNA to identify the burglar. These are cases that for years in our city just went unsolved. The police told the victims, sorry, there's really nothing we can do unless we catch these guys red-handed. What we've been able to do is show that we are 8 times more likely to be able to prosecute the individual if we had able to find DNA. And we were also able to increase the number of years on average they were getting. Remember, these are habitual criminals. These are guys that are professional burglars. So some of these sentences look awful long, but we have habitual criminal statutes in Colorado. So when we had somebody that we've caught on a home invasion burglary, we made them plead to the charge. They got an average sentence of 13.9 years in the penitentiary, as opposed to a case where we didn't have DNA, and they got 1.4 years in the traditional investigation cases. Keep in mind that a lot of those traditional investigation cases were people that did not have the criminal histories, and of course, because they didn't have criminal histories, they weren't getting into our CODIS database. So we were getting hits on habitual criminals, people that do crimes for a living, and they were getting almost 14-year sentences on average for the crimes that we were solving with DNA. Over the 2-year period, We did statistics both based on the United States and the cost of a burglary, and also looked at statistics in the UK, and were able to come up with how much money we believed that our project saved the people of Denver. It's $25.6 million in property loss, and we were able to free up 150 hours of time for each police officer that works in Denver. About 1,300 police officers on the Denver Police Department at the time that we did this study. We also tried to do a correlation between reducing the property crimes and did we see a reduction in our violent crimes. Of course, we had other things going on at the time. We were using DNA to solve cold cases. We were using DNA to catch rapists. But we saw a correlation. For every 10% that we reduced our property crime rate, we experienced, during the same period of time of this study, a 7.8 reduction in Part 1 crimes against persons, or violent crimes. And our return on investment, we were able to show for every dollar of the $500,000 that the National Institute of Justice gave us, we gained a $63 on our investment. And during the economy that we were talking about, it's a pretty good investment. For every dollar, you get back $63. We had suspects that got hungry, that got thirsty.
And now we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the impact of burglary on crime victims. And nationally, we know that victims suffered an estimated $4.6 billion, that's billion with a B, in lost property, which averages a little bit over $2,000 per burglary offense. 72% of these burglary offenses were, in fact, burglaries of residential properties. And that's the area that we're focusing on in terms of impact on victims when a habitual offender enters your home. You know, we know when we talk a lot, usually it's in the discussions about violent crime, we talk about the physical, financial, emotional, social, and spiritual impacts on crime victims. And victimization is something that becomes a pall over the life of those who experience it. And as it crawls into that part of your life and has these impacts, we just have set as a nation a priority of doing something different to intervene. Well, if we can prevent these from happening, then we're preventing these five victimization impacts from occurring.
We had a suspect that ate a tuna fish sandwich that he found in a refrigerator. Also suspects that drank off soda cans, beer cans, that type of thing.
Some of the research, and we'll talk about this at the end, that it is pretty thin, but some of the research that we've found about burglary is involving what's called the territoriality theory, which is used to describe the experiences of burglary victims. In this case, it was 44 female victims in suburban environments. And what they reported was that their comfort in their immediate coping strategies were not related to their sense of long-term security. And the more the territorial intrusions occurred, the ransacking of homes, the destruction of the property, the lower the sense of security. And this was from an '89 study, so let's mark that was a long time ago.
Denver police say that some of the city's most prolific burglars can hit upwards of 200 homes in a year. And that is why the city jumped at the chance to take part in a national study which wants to know how successful DNA testing can be in cases other than murders and sex assaults. Night News reporter Chris Vanderveen joins us now in the newsroom. Chris, that study's almost done.
Bob, it sure is, and unfortunately for its supporters, of which there are a lot in this city, that money that came along with this federal study is about to be cut off as well. So they're now championing the benefits of tracing DNA left behind by burglars at crime scenes, believing many burglars aren't simply one-time offenders. Those who prowl.
The kind of guy that goes out wakes up in the morning,
goes to burgle.
where am I going to go today? What neighborhood?
Oftentimes very busy.
But how many houses am I going to hit?
Denver DA Mitch Morrissey says it's a habit he's been trying to break.
The people we're focused on here are habitual criminals, and they do this for a living.
Case in point, the case of David Weller, a burglar who prosecutors believe burglarized over 1,000 Denver area homes. And he's not the only one they've locked up recently.
What we've done is taken 40 out, 40 prolific burglars.
Credit
It's a good investment in time.
DNA testing, say Denver police.
I think it's been extremely successful.
For the last year and a half, acting with the help of federal funds, the Denver Crime Lab has helped prosecutors file 137 burglary cases they might otherwise not have been able to file.
Before, you were spending hours and hours going after the same guy who's committed several crimes.
In addition to Weller, they've nabbed people like his wife, Dina Weller, Michael Davis, who got 48 years, and David Cropper, who got 36.
I really do think that this is the future as far as using technology in conjunction with just good police work.
Still, only about 1 in 10 burglars leave behind enough DNA evidence that can be tested these days. Enough, they say, to still get some of the busier burglars off the street.
So we're seeing the impact.
So now expect the DA and police to campaign to city leaders to see if they can get the $250,000 to fund this for another year. And also expect the federal government to parade Denver's numbers around the country, hoping other cities will pursue this route as well. Bob?
All right, Chris, thank you. The Denver District Attorney says the juries really expect DNA evidence these days. He says that just having DNA evidence in a burglary case makes his office 6 times more likely to prosecute.
Here's a partially chewed piece of a sandwich. And then you move into the bedroom of the home, and obviously fecal matter found on a towel.
Back to the studies that we've seen, we do know that past victimization is among the best predictors of future risk, and that the re-victimization in property crimes obviously tends to be higher in high crime areas. One of the things that turns these areas into high crime areas is the fact that the burglars that are operating in there are professional and repetitive in what they do. So most criminals commit those crimes in the areas that they're familiar with. And when you have committed, as you heard in the earlier piece, 1,000 burglaries, you get to be fairly talented at knowing the ins and outs of the alleys and the lighting and all of those kinds of things. And so we end up with a population that can be victimized over and over again. And in this case, the population we're talking about are communities. A study that was conducted in Europe found that repeat burglar victims were less positive about their neighborhoods, and they were more likely to be afraid of future burglary and street offenses. Of course, in this matter, what we know is that particularly for victims who are vulnerable, elderly, disabled, it creates problems that are secondary. Am I willing to go out and get my medicine? Am I willing to go out and get the proper food that I need for nutrition? I'm afraid to go out and do the social things that I want to do. So that's the secondary level of victimization that we start to talk about. A University of North Carolina professor interviewed 68 burglary victims. Most of them were women, and their sense of the experience was a sense of violation. And that was from, again, a 96 Psychology Today study that was put in place. But what we really know is that we don't have enough statistics nationally, that we don't have enough specific documents that look deep into the causes of trauma, the levels of trauma, and the secondary impacts of what happens when a home is burglarized. In today's world, when you overlay the difficulties in the economy, the ability to recover for many families is not what it was when the economy was flying high. So paying for school, paying for those things that enhance lifestyle are impacted when you're facing these kinds of losses.
Well, yeah, you feel violated anytime somebody breaks into anything you own and steals or tears it up.
Philip Wiley can still remember the morning he found his driver's side window smashed and his car rifled through while it was sitting in his driveway.
There was lots of blood everywhere, so, and he took blood samples.
Floyd County Police say that blood cracked open the case nearly 2 years later with the arrest of Craig Proctor. In 2003, this Great Harvest bread store was broken into, a safe and cash stolen. Now, more than 3 years later, a dropped cigarette led police to Robert Poppy, who later confessed to more than 130 burglaries in Kentucky and Indiana.
The offender database just keeps growing every day. It's going to get to where it's going to be hard to get away with a crime.
Floyd County Captain Jeff Topping says the detectives used to rely on fingerprints, pictures of crime scenes, and witness descriptions. But now, with the additional help of DNA, they're turning cold case burglaries red hot.
It's almost like anything they leave behind is going to come back to match up. Anything from cigarette butts, beer cans, steering wheels on cars. We had a vehicle theft. We recovered a stolen vehicle, come up with a match on that.
Captain Topping says back in 2003, it would take more than a year to get lab results back on DNA. But now, with more technicians and more resources, that time has been cut in half, helping Floyd County detectives solve 18 cold case burglaries in just the last few months, disproving many common misconceptions.
Normally, this only happens if it's a homicide scene or a very serious crime. No, it's got to the point where we're collecting DNA on every scene if there's DNA there.
Good news to people like Wiley, who take some satisfaction knowing microscopic evidence is acting as ears and eyes when no one else is watching.
It's not a comfortable feeling knowing that somebody can just take liberty at your stuff and just take whatever they want to, and yeah, I'm glad the guy got caught.
And the good news from our study was that more and more places in the United States are using DNA to solve property crimes. The good news in Denver was that because of the statistics that we kept, we were able to convince the city government to pick up the salaries of the one person that was dedicated to doing DNA in the lab, and also to add an additional individual for that purpose. We faced a lot of budget cuts in Denver, and we've gone up and down a little bit, and whenever we don't have full staff on doing DNA on property crimes, we've seen the property crimes and the burglaries start to sneak up a bit. But as soon as we get somebody trained and back in place in this program, we start to see the kind of reductions that we saw during the course of the study. These are some of the individuals that once we did the collection of the lollipops, the partially eaten tuna fish sandwich, when it got back to the lab, these were the individuals that we matched. Obviously, here's Mr. Wright. He was an individual that left his DNA on a soda can on the outside of the burglary. We had a few cases where we had DNA on the outside of the home and weren't able to proceed unless we had something else that indicated the individual was inside the home. Mr. Wright actually took some of the items that he stole from the home and he pawned those items. So it was a combination of finding his DNA outside at the point of entry and also the fact that he pawned stolen items from the home that we were able to get a 12-year sentence in the penitentiary on him. Mr. Whitley left behind a lollipop, the lollipop that we saw in the presentation. We were able to charge him with a home burglary, and he was a 5-time prior convicted habitual criminal. Mr. Nelson was the individual that urinated on people's clothing. We charged him with 9 home burglaries and theft. No idea why he was doing what he was doing. We also were able to solve a number of burglaries to different types of businesses. Mr. Gonzalez left blood on a cash register. He cut himself at the point of entry on the glass, bled all over the cash register, which he rifled through. We filed that as a John Doe case, and 6 months after we filed the case, we got our CODIS hit. Mr. Davis has been talked about throughout this presentation. He's really kind of the poster boy from this project. He came to us from Missouri. He was a 13-time convicted felon. He really had no contact with Denver other than he was here to do drugs and to pull burglaries. We linked him in 5 burglaries through DNA, and then just through good detective work, we're able to make him on another 7 burglaries. Mr. Davis actually broke into a home where the homeowner was present. Homeowner was down working in a workshop that he had in the basement. Mr. Davis and he got into a pretty violent fight where the homeowner struck Mr. Davis in the head with a wrench, which caused him to bleed, which left his DNA then on the floor of the burglary. Davis got away, but we used DNA to capture him. Because of his criminal history and the number of burglaries that we made on him, he got a 48-year sentence in the penitentiary. This individual left DNA on different types of soda cans and containers in 4 different homes, ended up with 5 cases and got 13 years in the penitentiary. This is one of my all-time favorites. He opened the refrigerator, saw a tuna fish sandwich, took a bite, didn't like it, spit it back on the plate, and put it back in the refrigerator. So not only did he preserve the DNA in a nice cool place for us, but we're able to get his saliva off the chewing that he did, the bite mark of the sandwich, and able to catch him through that. Mr. Cropper dropped a comb, and based on hairs that we recovered from the home, we were able to make him, on this case, the jury found him guilty of burglary, and because he was an habitual criminal, he got a 30-year sentence in the penitentiary. These 2 individuals were talked about in the tape. We had an incredible spree of burglaries going on in one of our biggest residential neighborhoods in Denver, thousands of burglaries that were being pulled. We caught these 2 on the same cigarette butt that they left in a home. And based on their criminal histories, we were able to get 48 years on Mr. Weller, and we were able to get a 36-year sentence on Mrs. Weller. Mrs. Weller primarily pawned most of the items in the cases, but was an habitual criminal. During her trial, Mr. Weller got on the witness stand and testified that since the last time he'd paroled, he had pulled 1,000 burglaries in that West Wash Park neighborhood. When we took them off the streets, our burglary rate in that neighborhood went down 41%. Obviously, other burglars have come in and filled that void, but it was very important to that community. We went to many angry community meetings before we caught them, but the community was very happy once we did catch the Wellers. So we have been able to reduce the burglary rate every year in our city since we've been using DNA to do this. I think if you add it up, we've reduced the burglary rate over the course of this study and then keeping it going about 41% in Denver. Because of that, we have also seen a reduction in our violent crime rate. Obviously, our budgets have been cut over time. We've got less and less, and we're being asked to do more with less. So it's very important to have your crime rate going down at the same time your budget is being cut. And we'd open it now for any questions.
Okay, thank you so much. And I haven't gotten any questions so far in the Q&A tool, but if anybody has any, feel free to send them in now. If we don't get any questions and you have questions that come up later, feel free to email to me and I will get them to Steve and Mitch. We opened our poll now, so people can take a little time to fill out our poll. If we don't get any more questions, we'll probably sign off in a minute. But I want to thank Mitch and Steve for sharing your expertise with us today and helping us understand how DNA can be used to solve burglary cases and how it's worthwhile in so many ways. Everyone, the presentation today was recorded, and so it will be made available online, and you can watch it again or send it to someone else you think might be interested in it. So you can check our website in a few days for that link and for the slides. They'll be posted there. Looks like I might have one question. Let's see. Okay, here is one question. I direct this to both of you, and you can decide who answers it. The question is, to what degree was touch DNA used?
We really tried to stay away from touch DNA, primarily because we felt that it would need an awful lot of reference samples from individuals that were in the home, like housekeepers, children, family members, and we thought we'd have to get an awful lot of reference samples, which would have increased the number of DNA testing samples that we had to test in our project. Others of the other 5 sites, others did actually try to do smudges on windows, a lot more touch DNA than we tried to. We really tried to take the money we had, go after blood we found at point of entry or in other places in the house, and go after saliva. They were the 2 best samples. We got DNA profiles more often on them, and we ended up with cases as a result of that without having to do a lot of elimination samples from people that were rightfully living in the home or working in the home.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a couple more questions coming in now. Can the Denver DNA lab accept DNA from prosecutors in different states and or locations due to no available DNA lab? I guess they're saying they don't have one. What are the protocols on that?
You know, they can't right now. We passed a bond issue in our city a couple of years ago, and in June we're opening a brand new forensic center for the Denver Police Department, a new crime lab. I don't know at that point if they'll do pay-for-service type services, but right now the Denver Police Crime Lab only services the city and county of Denver. Of course, the benefit to the state of Colorado is that they handle about 1/3 of the cases for the state, and the state doesn't have to do those cases. So the rest of the state of Colorado benefits because Denver does have its own crime lab. But right now, they don't have the personnel to actually do other people's work.
Okay, thank you for that. Here's a question that is actually related to a webinar I did a couple weeks ago. The question is, are any of you familiar with Lotus? I don't know if you want to answer that or not, but I want to just say that we did a webinar on local databases a couple of weeks ago, and that webinar recording is on our website, and the PowerPoints are there as well. 2 of our experts who spoke about using local databases are also available for consultation if you're interested in looking at that kind of program and community. But do you have anything to say about local databases, Mitch?
Well, Lotus and a local database are really 2 different things. As far as if you're part of the CODIS system, then, and like for instance, Denver has a local DNA database that then certain portions of those profiles can be uploaded into our state system. Lotus is actually, I believe, a private company. I've seen presentations that they've done where you actually send your DNA to them, and they help you solve a lot of the same types of crimes we've talked about today: car break-ins, auto thefts, and burglary cases. And the statistics that I've seen regarding Lotus are very promising. We obviously don't use them because we have our own crime lab, and we're able to do that. But some departments were very frustrated in that their state labs were telling them that they didn't do property crimes, or that those property crimes were falling to the very end of the list, so it was taking a year or so to get results. One thing I can tell you is having these dedicated analysts in our lab is a lot like Lotus. So we had a very short turnaround time, and we were able to approach very prolific offenders, people that were just killing us out there, pulling 3-4 burglaries a day. We're able to catch them a whole lot sooner than we would have if we would have had to wait months and months to get those DNA results.
Okay, great. Actually, we have quite a few questions. We have about 3 more minutes, so we'll go through some of these. Let's see. Did commercial burglary results go down too?
Both commercial and home residential burglaries went down because we didn't make that distinction in the study. We were just looking at burglaries. Our state statute makes the distinction between residential and commercial burglaries, but we had the same success rate with commercial burglaries. Of course, we didn't find them eating any food or necessarily drinking any soda, but based on the blood and cigarette butts, the saliva, we had great success in commercial burglaries.
Okay. Here's a question that is of interest to me, and we've had this conversation amongst ourselves here about the connection between burglary and sexual assault. And the question is, we often hear of the connection of burglary offenses to sexual assault offenses. Has your work in this area ultimately led to the identification and conviction of any sexual assault offenders?
Well, we've had a lot of success in reducing, for the first time in a long time in our city, reducing the sex assault rate. We believe that it's based on two things. This project, we know that burglars commit sexual assaults, but also our cold case program, we've caught 70 rapists in our cold case program. That doesn't count our homicides, and we have 11 additional homicides. Every single one of those offenders, the 70 in our rape program and the 10 in the homicides, had a previous conviction or contact with law enforcement for a sexual assault. So it's a combination of our cold case project, which again centers around DNA, and this project that helps us take burglars off the street, to that we're seeing a reduction in sexual assaults in Denver, which is very rare. We don't usually see that kind of reduction.
One of the things that I think we made a pitch for in this presentation is, in fact, to do greater research that would tie together the progression of criminal behavior. Anecdotally, I think Mitch and I can tell you over our probably 60-plus years that step up from cars to entering into someone's house to being willing to attack those people individually is not an uncommon thing. But we have not, in all of our efforts, been able to uncover that specific kind of research. But we can tell you from those 70 sex assault offenders that the long list of prior crimes certainly will include some burglaries.
Also, one thing you also can use to kind of show that that's a strong indicator that as the state database is developed, there were certain states that specifically had violent offenders in their CODIS database. When they moved to putting in burglars, like Georgia, when they decided they would put in people that invaded people's homes, they started to see a large increase in the number of people that they were making hits on to sexual assault. So there's a lot of strong indicators that burglars, when given the opportunity, will sexually assault children and women when they break into homes. Obviously, the kind of altercation that Mr. Davis got in was a physical altercation, not a sexual assault.
Okay, thank you. I think we are out of time.
There was one other question about the cost.
Oh,
so
yeah.
The only cost that we have now is the salary of the 2 analysts that are dedicated to the program. The project, all those people that we listed that were part of the study, because we train people, because we took the steps we took, every now and then we have to do a refresher, but the cost is basically down to the salary of the 2 analysts that work on this. There's no more money to my office than we get other than the general fund. There's no more money to anybody at the police department other than the 2 analysts that work on these cases solely, and that's the sole cost.
And I think the point Mitch makes in this project, as well as many of the projects that we've done, is that over time what you do is institutionalize the behavioral change of the system so that it's no longer a special project, it's just the way you do business.
Right, that's a very good point to end on. Do you have any kind of closing comments that you want to leave us with besides that?
No, I also just thank you very much for asking us to be involved in this, and we enjoyed doing it. Hopefully your audience took away some good information.
And for us, a special thanks goes to Josh Thurman for helping us put together the Prezi presentation and doing the technical side of things.
Right. Thank you very much to Josh, for sure. We are going to sign off, and an evaluation will come up. If you would fill that out for us, and the poll as well, if you haven't taken the closing poll, that would be great. Again, they help us to measure the effectiveness of our webinars, and I want to thank everyone for listening, and have a great afternoon.